In fact, I'm currently joined by Jessica Stone. Jessica, interesting meetings going on there in the United States between the Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister, and Elon Musk, the US NSA. What does all of that mean in the larger context before I ask you any other question?
Well, I think in the larger context, what you'll hear Americans say is that they're looking for a reliable partner to counter China in its expansionism, particularly in East and Southeast Asia. They're looking for more cooperation on expanding the supply chain, and they see India as a key part of that China plus one strategy that they've asked many companies to have in the course of the US-China decoupling of those supply chains, moving some of that not only to Southeast Asia, but to India as well. And there, of course, is a large affinity not only between these two leaders, but between so many millions of people in this country who count themselves Indian Americans and have close ties with their families back in India, not least of which is the vice president's wife, Usha Vance, who, of course, is of Indian descent. And we have many government officials and historically have had of Indian descent. So I think you will hear from the Trump administration that they will have some tough love talks, especially along the lines of economic. But I've really been struck by the positive tone that the Trump administration has been taking in advance of these talks that will begin later today between Modi and Trump.
Absolutely. And Jessica, speaking specifically about Elon Musk meeting with Prime Minister Modi and the kind of influence that Elon Musk currently enjoys, particularly with United States politics. We saw that meeting. We saw Elon Musk meeting Prime Minister Modi with his family. There was a lot of laughter. There were a lot of smiles there. But it wasn't as this is likely to be a little more complex than that.
Certainly, and of course, Elon Musk has many hats right now. He is running multiple companies at the same time as running this huge cost-cutting effort in the United States government at the direction of President Trump. And that's really his main task. Of course, there's no denying that he has interests around the world in expanding Tesla and Starlink and various other entrepreneurial endeavors. But he has really been focused, very much of his personal time has been focused on this cost cutting that he's endeavoring to undertake in the US government, the likes of which hasn't really been seen in terms of the depth of these cuts, potentially since the Clinton administration.
Right. Speaking about Prime Minister Modi's meeting with US NSA Mike Walz, and speaking specifically about national security issue, do you think there were any sort of discussions related to national security, counter-terrorism, as well as defense cooperation between India and the United States? And if it did take place, how crucial is that in that context, and especially for both the countries, India as well as the United States?
So a couple of things I would say there. Obviously, defense cooperation has been identified by Donald Trump, by the Trump administration, as a key objective of this visit, building on the progress that started under the re-implementation of the Quad under the first Trump administration, extending through the Biden administration, which also sought to continue that construct. And now we see even closer defense cooperation between those four partners when it comes to Coast Guard patrols, when it comes to countering China economically and strategically. We are seeing a more visible undercurrent within the Quad context, perhaps much to India's chagrin, of countering these anti-free voices in parts of the world, whether that's anti-free trade or anti-free, probably more specifically, the lack of freedoms of religion, of press, of assembly that we see happening in places where China has tremendous influence. So defense cooperation is not only key for that strategic sense, but also because the U.S. has mapped out a path to reduce the deficit between the two countries, asking Modi specifically to purchase more weapon systems, whether that's drones or small nuclear, medium-sized reactors, or whether that's engines, the likes of which we saw announced during the state visit 2 years back. So there is a close continuity between not only deeper strategic planning between these two countries in terms of the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. calling India as a strategic partner, a very close strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific, an indispensable partner in the Indo-Pacific, but also in the ways that the U.S. is asking India to acquire more U.S. weaponry, less Russian weaponry, in order to be more interdependent economically, and also more interdependent potentially between the two militaries.
Absolutely, and interesting that you mentioned that because India, it enjoys this position where they are friendly with the United States. They are also friendly with Russia. How does it sit with the United States government, and how is that going to be a part of that discussion? And how do you think that is going to go about?
Well, you mentioned earlier that both of these two leaders want to see an end to global wars. And I think that is something that they have in common. It's not as though the Biden administration wasn't interested in an end to the Ukraine war, but they certainly wanted to end it differently than the Trump administration, to the extent that we know what the outlines of the plan is, have put forward. There is an interest to deal with the Russians directly on the part of the Trump administration that wasn't there during the Biden administration. So perhaps that is a place where they could have some alignment between Modi and Trump in a discussion about ending that war. But I don't think that will extend to an encouragement of closer relationships with Moscow. It is possible that Trump would ask Modi to bear his influence on Putin in terms of the end of Ukraine. So we could see that too. It's very clear, that this Modi visit is coming against the backdrop of a huge effort on the part of the U.S. government to end that war. They spent a lot of yesterday telegraphing how they wanted to do that, that phone call with Vladimir Putin. And so within that context, I think it's very reasonable to expect that question to come up at the press conference at 5 p.m. local time and potentially behind closed doors as well.
All right, Jessica Stone, thank you very much for getting us all the latest from Washington, D.C. and putting everything in perspective for our viewers as well.